The Boston winter wind whipped around Karim al-Rashid's face as he stood before the imposing Victorian-era building on Beacon Hill. The once magnificent structure, with its weathered brownstone facade and ornate cornices, spoke of forgotten grandeur and untold stories. At 42, Karim had transformed countless properties across the globe, but something about this particular building stirred memories he'd long suppressed. "Mr. al-Rashid, here are the preliminary inspection reports," Sarah, Chen, his real estate manager, handed him a thick folder. "The structure is sound, but the interior needs complete renovation. Are you sure about this investment? The asking price seems inflated even for this location." Karim's dark eyes remained fixed on the building's elaborate entrance, where carved angels had weathered decades of neglect. "Sometimes, Sarah, value lies beyond spreadsheets and market analyses." He traced his fingers along the cold stone. "This building has a story to tell." The property had caught his attention during a routine investment screening. Built in 1878 by industrialist Theodore Hammond, the building had housed Boston's elite before falling into disrepair in the 1970s. Its last official owner had vanished decades ago, leaving the property in legal limbo until recent court proceedings had finally cleared the way for its sale. "The City Council is eager to see it restored," Sarah continued, her practical tone grounding Karim's contemplation. "They're offering tax incentives for historical preservation, but the restrictions on modernization could complicate our usual development approach." Karim pulled his cashmere coat tighter against the chill. "Schedule a thorough inspection for tomorrow. I want to see every floor, every room." He paused, considering. "And Sarah, keep this acquisition quiet for now. No press releases, no social media updates." As Sarah nodded and retreated to their waiting car, Karim remained studying the building's facade. Something about its dignified decay reminded him of his grandfather's stories about their family's lost fortune in Dubai. Tales of betrayal and resilience that had shaped his own path to success. The following morning arrived clear and crisp. Karim arrived early, watching the sunrise paint the building's stone face in shades of amber. The inspection team, led by veteran architect James Morton, waited with their equipment. "Shall we begin at the top floor and work our way down?" James suggested, adjusting his hard hat. The upper levels often reveal the most about a building's condition. The group ascended via the service stairs, their footsteps echoing through the empty structure. The top-floor corridor stretched before them, its high ceilings still bearing traces of elaborate molding beneath years of neglect. As they approached the final door, Karim noticed something odd. A faint warmth emanating from beneath it, contrasting with the building's overall chill. James reached for the handle, but Karim held up his hand. "Wait." He pressed his ear to the door and heard what sounded like movement inside. "Is someone there?" he called out, his voice firm but non-threatening. Silence answered, but his instincts told him otherwise. After a moment's consideration, he spoke again, this time in a gentler tone. "We're not here to cause any harm. If someone's inside, we just want to talk." Several seconds passed before a quiet voice responded from within. "Please, we have nowhere else to go." Karim exchanged glances with James and Sarah before addressing the voice again. "I'm Karim al-Rashid, the potential buyer of this building. May we come in and talk?" After a pause, the sound of multiple locks being undone filled the corridor. The door opened slightly, revealing an elderly woman with silver hair and dignified features despite her obvious anxiety. Behind her stood a younger woman, probably in her mid-30s, with the same proud bearing but cautious eyes. The room beyond them was Spartan but meticulously maintained, with makeshift furniture and carefully organized belongings. A small electric heater hummed in the corner, explaining the warmth Karim had detected. "I'm Eleanor Blackwood," the older woman said, her voice steady despite her circumstances. "This is my daughter, Rebecca. We've been here for 8 months." She lifted her chin slightly, maintaining her dignity. "We understand if you need to call the authorities." Karim studied them both, noting the intelligence in their eyes and the careful way they'd maintained their living space. These weren't ordinary squatters. There was a story here, one that stirred his curiosity and awakened memories of his own family's struggles. No authorities, he said finally, surprising both his team and the women. But I would like to understand your situation. He turned to Sarah and James. Continue the inspection of the other floors. I'll join you shortly. As his team departed, Eleanor and Rebecca exchanged glances before stepping aside to let him enter their makeshift home. The space revealed more about them. Books lined improvised shelves, architectural drawings were carefully stored in tubes, and a small laptop sat on a folding table. Rebecca is an architectural historian, Eleanor explained, noting Karim's interest in the drawings. We had a life, a home before, she trailed off, the weight of unspoken hardship in her voice. Rebecca stepped forward, her professional bearing evident despite their circumstances. Mother, let me explain. She turned to Karim. Mr. Al-Rashid, our presence here isn't random. This building and it holds secrets that powerful people want to keep buried, secrets that cost our family everything. Karim felt the familiar thrill of intuition that had guided his most successful ventures. This wasn't just about a property investment anymore. As he listened to Rebecca begin their story, he realized he'd stumbled upon something far more significant, a mystery that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, justice, and the true meaning of legacy. Rebecca's revelation hung in the air of the makeshift apartment as she retrieved a worn leather portfolio from beneath a loose floorboard. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, but her voice remained steady. My father was Thomas Blackwood, one of Boston's leading historical architects, she began, spreading out yellow documents on the folding table. He specialized in documenting and preserving Gilded Age buildings, particularly those with complicated histories. Karim settled into an offered chair, noting how Eleanor's expression tightened at the mention of her husband. The morning light, filtering through the dusty windows, cast long shadows across the room as Rebecca continued. 3 years ago, Dad was hired to consult on this building's potential restoration. He was thrilled. The Hammond building had always fascinated him, but as he dug deeper into its history, he found inconsistencies in the original construction documents. She pulled out an architectural drawing, its edges cracked with age. This building wasn't just a symbol of wealth and power, it was designed to hide something. The original plans show a complex network of hidden rooms and passages that don't appear in any official records. Eleanor moved to stand behind her daughter, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. Thomas became obsessed with uncovering the truth. He spent countless nights here, measuring rooms, comparing dimensions, searching for entrances to these hidden spaces. And he found them, Rebecca said, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. But he also found financial records, letters, and photographs that implicated several of Boston's most prominent families in a decades-long scheme of corruption and fraud. Karim leaned forward, his property developer's mind already calculating angles and possibilities. These families, are they still influential today? Very, Eleanor answered, her face grave. The descendants of those involved now control some of the largest development companies in New England. They've worked hard to bury their family's past indiscretions. Rebecca spread out more documents, careful copies her father had made of the originals. The Hammond building served as their base of operations for years. The hidden rooms hosted secret meetings where they manipulated real estate markets, bribed officials, and laundered money through construction projects. When Dad confronted them with evidence, they destroyed him, Rebecca continued, her professional composure cracking slightly. They used their connections to blacklist him from every major architectural firm in the region. False accusations of professional misconduct destroyed his reputation. Our savings disappeared in legal battles we couldn't win. Eleanor moved to the window, gazing out at the city below. The stress was too much for Thomas. After his heart condition worsened, he asked Rebecca to continue his work, to find a way to expose the truth. Karim studied the documents before him, his mind racing. The systematic corruption Rebecca described reminded him of stories his grandfather had told about the business empire their family had lost, how a trusted partner had orchestrated their downfall through similar tactics. These hidden rooms, he said finally, can you show me? Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. Some of them. We've only managed to access a few, and we have to be careful. They know people are interested in buying this building. They've had it watched." As if to emphasize her point, a black sedan drove slowly past the building below. Eleanor tensed visibly at the sight. "That's the third time this morning," she murmured. Karim stood, making a decision that would alter not just his investment plans, but the lives of everyone in the room. "Pack your essential belongings," he said. "You're coming with me." Both women stared at him in surprise. "Mr. Al-Rashid," Eleanor began, "we couldn't possibly—" "Please," he interrupted gently, "call me Karim, and this isn't charity, it's strategy. Your knowledge is vital to understanding this building's true value, and you need a safe place to continue your investigation." He smiled slightly. "Besides, my penthouse has excellent security and plenty of space." Rebecca exchanged a long look with her mother before responding. "You understand what you're getting involved in. These people, they have enormous influence and resources." Karim's smile turned grim. "I understand perfectly. My family once lost everything to men who thought their power made them untouchable." He gestured to the documents on the table. "Perhaps it's time for history to stop repeating itself." As the women gathered their belongings, Karim sent a text to Sarah, instructing her to arrange immediate security for the building and to begin background checks on the current owners of Boston's major development companies. Another message went to his private security team, requesting additional protection for his penthouse. Looking out the window at the black sedan making another pass, Karim felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. Every successful developer knew that timing was everything, knowing when to buy, when to sell, when to hold. But as he watched Rebecca carefully pack away her father's research, he realized this investment had become about something far more valuable than property. The morning sun had risen fully now, illuminating the room's dust motes like floating gold. Soon they would leave this hidden sanctuary for the relative safety of his home. But first Rebecca had promised to show him one of the secret rooms, a chamber that held, she claimed, evidence of connections between the building's corrupt past and present-day power brokers. As they prepared to descend into the building's hidden depths, Karim couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. The Hammond building had called to him for a reason, and now he understood why. Like the ancient stones of his ancestors' lost homes, it held secrets that demanded to be brought into the light. The descent into the Hammond building's lower levels felt like stepping through time. Karim followed Rebecca down a narrow service stairwell, their footsteps echoing off worn marble steps. Eleanor had remained in Karim's penthouse, organizing their documents and establishing a secure workspace with his sophisticated home office equipment. "The original blueprints show a series of false walls," Rebecca explained, her voice barely above a whisper, despite the building being empty. "Dad found that certain architectural details, specific patterns in the woodwork, marked the entrance points to hidden passages." They reached the second floor, where Rebecca led him to what appeared to be an ordinary wood-paneled wall at the end of a dusty corridor. She pressed specific points in the elaborate carving, and with a soft click, a section of the wall swung inward. "The craftsmanship is remarkable," Karim noted, running his fingers along the nearly invisible seam. "Even knowing it's here, I can barely detect the door." Rebecca nodded, pulling out a flashlight. That's what made the Hammond building perfect for their operations. Everything hidden in plain sight, disguised as Victorian architectural excess. They stepped through the opening into a narrow passage. The beam from Rebecca's flashlight revealed walls lined with shelves and cabinets, thick with decades of dust but otherwise remarkably preserved. "This was one of their record rooms," Rebecca explained, moving her light across the space. "Most of the documents were removed long ago, but Dad found some that had slipped behind the cabinets." She moved to a specific spot, reaching behind a shelf to retrieve a slim leather folder. "Look at this," she said, carefully opening the folder. Inside were photographs from what appeared to be the 1960s, showing well-dressed men in what Karim recognized as the building's main parlor. "That man in the center," Rebecca pointed, "is Richard Hammond III, Theodore Hammond's grandson. And next to him—" Karim leaned closer, his breath catching. "That's impossible." You recognize someone? The man on the right. He's wearing a distinctive ring. My grandfather had one exactly like it. Karim took out his phone, quickly pulling up an old family photo. See? The same design. Rebecca studied both images. Your grandfather was involved with these people? Not directly, Karim said slowly, pieces of an old family mystery beginning to align. But he always claimed that his business partner, the man who betrayed him, had connections to powerful American families. I never knew the details. It was too painful for him to discuss. A sudden noise from above made them both freeze. Footsteps, too deliberate to be random creaks of an old building, moved across the floor above them. The building's supposed to be empty, Rebecca whispered, switching off her flashlight. Karim pulled out his phone, quickly texting his security team, who were supposed to be monitoring the exterior. The response came back immediately. Black sedan dropped someone off on the side street. Subject entered through service door before. We could intercept. He showed Rebecca the message. In the darkness, he could barely make out her expression, but he felt her tension. There's another way out through here, she whispered. It connects to the old servants' corridor. They moved silently through the hidden passage, Rebecca leading the way with practiced ease. The footsteps above seemed to be searching systematically, moving from room to room. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged through another concealed door into a narrow hallway near the building's rear entrance. Karim's security team was waiting, having been directed there by his text. Sweep the building, he ordered quietly. But don't let them know you found anything unusual. I want to know who's interested enough in this place to break in. As they drove back to his penthouse, Karim noticed Rebecca clutching the folder of photographs tightly. Your father, he said gently. He didn't just stumble onto this connection between our families, did he? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. No, she finally admitted. He was looking for something specific, evidence of an international connection to the Hammond family's operations. He believed their influence extended far beyond Boston. She turned to face him. I think he was trying to find proof of what happened to your family. Karim sat back, his mind racing. The Hammond building had called to him for a reason, not just business instinct or architectural appreciation, but something deeper. The threads of past and present were weaving together, forming a pattern he was only beginning to understand. Back in his penthouse, Eleanor was waiting with news of her own. Spread across Karim's desk were printouts of corporate records and newspaper articles she'd spent the morning researching. You need to see this, she said, holding up a document. I've been tracking the ownership history of major development projects in Boston over the last 50 years. There's a pattern. Whenever the Hammond family's company faced financial trouble, they suddenly received massive foreign investments through shell companies. Let me guess, Karim said. Some of those shell companies were registered in Dubai. Eleanor nodded. And the timing matches perfectly with your family's losses. Rebecca laid out the photographs they'd recovered on top of her mother's research. We're not dealing with separate mysteries, she said quietly. This is all one story. Your family's and ours. The Hammond building isn't just evidence of past crimes, it's proof of an operation that never really ended. Karim moved to his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the Boston skyline. Somewhere out there, the people who had tried to search the building today were probably planning their next move. They knew he was getting close to something, close enough to make them nervous. Then it's time, he said, turning back to Eleanor and Rebecca, to bring it all into the light. The following days transformed Karim's penthouse into a command center for their investigation. Eleanor's methodical research skills complemented Rebecca's architectural knowledge, while Karim's business connections provided access to records that might otherwise have remained hidden. Sarah Chen, initially skeptical of the situation, proved to be an invaluable ally. Her experience in real estate development helped them map the complex web of shell companies and property transfers that had protected the Hammond family's interests for decades. Look at this pattern, Sarah said one morning, pointing to a timeline she'd created. Every major real estate crash in Boston's history, the Hammond Group somehow came out stronger, acquiring premium properties at fraction of their value. They weren't just predicting the market, Karim observed. They were manipulating it, creating artificial crises to force smaller developers into bankruptcy. Rebecca nodded, spreading out more of her father's recovered documents, and using the hidden rooms in the Hammond building to coordinate everything. Dad found evidence of meetings as recent as 5 years ago, modern power brokers using the same secret spaces their grandfathers did. Eleanor, who had been quietly studying property records on Kareem's laptop, suddenly straightened. "I think I found something. The last registered owner of the Hammond building before it fell into limbo. It was a company called Crescent Holdings." Kareem's expression darkened. "That was my grandfather's company, before it was stolen from him." "But how?" He moved to look at Eleanor's screen, his hands gripping the back of her chair. "The dates don't make sense. Crescent Holdings was dissolved in Dubai decades ago." "Unless," Sarah interjected, "that was just what they wanted everyone to believe. What if they kept the company alive here, using it to hide their American assets?" A knock at the penthouse door made them all jump. Kareem's security system showed it was Marcus Wright, his private investigator, who he'd tasked with surveillance on the Hammond building. "You need to see this," Marcus said without preamble as he entered, pulling out his tablet. "That black sedan that's been watching the building, it's registered to Summit Development Group." Rebecca inhaled sharply. "That's William Hammond's company, Richard Hammond III's grandson. He's one of the largest developers in New England." Marcus nodded. "And here's where it gets interesting. Summit just filed permits for a massive redevelopment project, covering the entire historic district around the Hammond building. They're trying to get the area rezoned for modern high-rises. They want to demolish it," Kareem realized. "Destroy the evidence before anyone can expose them." He turned to Sarah. "How long until the sale closes?" 3 days, she replied. "But if Summit has as much influence as we suspect, they could try to block it. Then we need to move faster." Kareem pulled up his contacts, searching for a specific name. "I know someone at the Boston Globe, a journalist who's been investigating corruption in city development. She's been trying to crack this story for years." "Is it safe to bring in the press?" Eleanor asked, concern evident in her voice. "Safer than trying to fight them alone," Kareem replied. "The more people who know the truth, the harder it will be for them to bury it again." He paused, looking at Rebecca. "But I won't make that decision alone. This is your father's work, your story too." Rebecca shared a long look with her mother before responding. "Dad always said the truth was worth any risk. He believed exposing corruption was the only way to prevent history from repeating itself." She squared her shoulders. "Make the call." As Kareem reached for his phone, a movement outside the window caught his attention. A drone hovered briefly, its camera pointed directly at them, before zipping away between the buildings. "They're watching us here too," Marcus observed grimly. "Good," Kareem said, his voice hard. "Let them watch. Let them wonder how much we know and who we're going to tell." He completed the call, speaking quickly when it was answered. "Kate, it's Kareem al-Rashid. Remember that story you were working on about historic building demolitions and developer corruption? I have something you need to see." After arranging a secure meeting with the journalist for the following day, Kareem turned back to his unlikely team. The sun was setting over Boston, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, the Hammond building stood as it had for nearly 150 years, its secrets finally on the verge of exposure. "Whatever happens next," he said, "we need to be prepared. These people have spent generations protecting their power. They won't give it up easily." Eleanor reached for her daughter's hand. "We've been hiding for so long. Maybe it's time to stop running and start fighting back." Rebecca squeezed her mother's hand, then began gathering their most crucial documents. Dad always said the Hammond building was more than just architecture. It was a testament to how power could corrupt across generations. But maybe it can be something else now. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "A testament to how the truth can survive, hidden away, waiting for the right moment to emerge." Rebecca looked at Kareem. "And for the right people to bring it into the light." As they worked late into the night, preparing their evidence for the journalist, none of them saw the black sedan park quietly on a side street, or the figures that emerged to take up positions around the building. The next 24 hours would test their resolve, their courage, and their belief in justice, and change all their lives forever. Kate Chen, the Boston Globe investigative reporter, arrived at Karim's penthouse precisely at dawn. She was younger than expected, but carried herself with the confident intensity of someone who had spent years chasing difficult stories. "So," she said, setting up her recording equipment on Karim's desk, "you're telling me the Hammond family's corruption goes beyond Boston, that it's connected to international financial fraud?" "It's more than that," Rebecca replied, spreading out the photographs and documents they'd gathered. The Hammond building wasn't just their headquarters. It was the center of a network that stretched across continents. They didn't just manipulate the local real estate market, they used it to launder money from international operations. Kate's eyes widened as she examined the evidence. These photographs, some of these men are still on corporate boards today, and these financial records. She paused, studying a particular document. "This transfer pattern is identical to one I've been investigating in current development deals." "Because they never stopped," Eleanor added quietly. "They just adapted their methods for the modern era. The same families, the same corruption, just hidden behind new company names and digital transactions." Karim watched the sunrise paint the city skyline as the women discussed the evidence. His security team had reported multiple surveillance vehicles during the night, but none had made any aggressive moves. The waiting was making him uneasy. Sarah burst into the room, her usually composed demeanor shaken. "Turn on the financial news. Now." Karim grabbed the remote, switching on the wall-mounted television. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen made his heart skip. "Summit Development Group announces $2 billion historic district renovation project. Emergency. City Council meeting called." "They're moving faster than we expected," Marcus said from his position by the door. "Trying to push the demolition permits through before we can act." Kate was already on her phone, typing rapidly. "My editor needs to see this now. If we can get the story out before the council meeting." A sharp knock at the door silenced everyone. Marcus checked the security feed and frowned. "It's William Hammond himself with lawyers." Karim straightened his tie, a calm settling over him. The same calm he felt before his biggest business deals. "Let them in. It's time we had this conversation face to face." William Hammond was tall and distinguished, his expensive suit and perfectly groomed silver hair projecting an image of aristocratic authority. Two sharp-eyed lawyers flanked him, carrying leather briefcases. "Mr. Al-Rashid," Hammond said smoothly, "I thought we should discuss your interest in our building privately, before any unfortunate publicity might damage its value." "Your building?" Karim raised an eyebrow. "According to the records, it belongs to Crescent Holdings, my grandfather's company." Hammond's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "A clerical error, I assure you, one our legal team is preparing to correct." He glanced dismissively at Eleanor and Rebecca, along with addressing the issue of certain unauthorized occupants spreading defamatory claims. "Defamatory?" Rebecca stepped forward, her voice steady despite her obvious anger. "Like the claims that ruined my father's career, or the evidence of how your family stole the building from Crescent Holdings." "My dear," Hammond said coldly, "your father's unfortunate obsession with conspiracy theories cost him his reputation. Don't make the same mistake." "It's not a mistake," Kate interjected, holding up one of the photographs. "Care to explain why your grandfather is meeting with known money launderers in the Hammond building's hidden rooms?" For the first time, Hammond's composure cracked slightly. He turned to his lawyers, speaking in a clipped tone. "Present the papers." One of the lawyers stepped forward, opening his briefcase. "We have here a cease and desist order as well as documents proving Summit Development's clear title to the property. Additionally, we're prepared to file suit for defamation, trespassing, and corporate espionage unless certain parties immediately cease their investigations." Karim took the papers, but didn't look at them. Instead, he met Hammond's gaze directly. "You know what I see when I look at you. I see the same arrogance that destroyed my family's business, the same belief that power and money put you above justice." "Justice?" Hammond scoffed. "We built this city, Mr. Al-Rashid. My family's vision and influence made Boston what it is today. A few ethical compromises along the way don't change that legacy. No, Eleanor said quietly, but the truth can change how people view that legacy. Hammond turned to her, his mask of civility slipping further. The truth? The truth is that weak people like your husband, like Mr. al-Rashid's grandfather, didn't have the strength to do what was necessary. They let sentiment and morality stand in the way of progress. Progress, Karim's voice was deadly quiet. Is that what you call demolishing history to hide your crimes? Crimes is such an ugly word, Hammond replied. We prefer to think of it as creative urban renewal. He checked his watch. The City Council meets in 3 hours. By this afternoon, the Hammond building's fate will be sealed. I suggest you all consider your next moves very carefully. As Hammond and his lawyers turned to leave, Kate held up her phone. The story's already filed, Mr. Hammond. My editor is waiting for my signal to run it. Hammond paused at the door. Stories can be killed, Ms. Chen. Careers can be ended. Ask Mr. Blackwood's daughter about that. After they left, a heavy silence fell over the penthouse. Finally, Sarah spoke up. He's right about one thing. They could shut down the story before it runs. They have that kind of influence. Then we need something more, Karim said thoughtfully. Something they can't bury or deny. He turned to Rebecca. You said there were more hidden rooms we haven't explored yet. Rebecca nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. The deepest one, in the sub-basement. Dad never managed to access it, but he was convinced it contained their most important records. Records they thought were safely hidden, Eleanor added. Records they might not have bothered to remove. Karim checked his watch. 3 hours until the council meeting. Marcus, get the cars ready. He turned to Kate. Hold the story. Give us 2 hours to find something that will make it impossible for them to shut you down. As they prepared to return to the Hammond building, Karim caught Rebecca studying the dawn-lit city skyline. Having second thoughts, she shook her head. Just thinking about Dad. He always said that buildings hold the truth of their time, in their bones, their hidden spaces, their secrets. He believed that truth would eventually come to light. It will, Karim promised. Today. The Hammond building's sub-basement felt like entering another world. The air was thick with decades of undisturbed dust, and their flashlight beams caught centuries-old brick walls, slick with moisture. Rebecca led the way, with Karim and Marcus close behind. Eleanor and Kate remained upstairs with Sarah and the security team, coordinating their efforts and watching for any sign of Hammond's people. The original plans show a massive foundation wall here, Rebecca explained, running her hands along the rough stone surface. But Dad's measurements proved it's too thick. There has to be space behind it. Karim studied the wall carefully. These bricks are different from the others, newer, probably added during a renovation. Look at the pattern. Rebecca nodded, excitedly. Just like upstairs, they used architectural details to hide their secrets. She began pressing specific points in the brickwork, following the pattern they'd discovered in the upper floors. A low grinding sound filled the basement. Slowly, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Motion sensors at the entrance, Marcus reported, checking their surroundings. Stay alert. They moved carefully into the hidden room, their flashlights revealing floor-to-ceiling metal filing cabinets and shelves lined with ledgers. Unlike the other secret chambers, this one showed no signs of having been cleared out. They never thought anyone would find this place, Rebecca breathed, pulling open a drawer. These records go back to the 1800s. Karim was already examining another cabinet. And forward to the present day. Look at these. Property transfers from just last year, all through shell companies connecting back to Summit Development. Here, Rebecca called out, her voice tight with emotion. These files are about Crescent Holdings. She handed Karim a thick folder. Everything about how they orchestrated your grandfather's downfall. Karim's hands trembled slightly as he opened the folder. Inside were detailed records of how the Hammond family had systematically undermined his grandfather's business, using their influence to freeze his assets and force him out of crucial deals. They didn't just steal his company, Karim said quietly. They used it as a front for their own illegal operations, hiding behind its reputation. A sudden noise from above made them all freeze. Marcus checked his phone. Security team reports multiple vehicles approaching. Black SUVs, no plates. Hammond's people, Karim guessed. He must have figured out what we're doing. He turned to Rebecca. How much time do you need to document everything? She was already photographing documents with practiced efficiency. 5 minutes for the most crucial evidence. But there's so much here. You have 3 minutes, Marcus said grimly. They're entering the building. Karim and Rebecca worked frantically, photographing and scanning everything they could while Marcus kept watch. The sound of footsteps echoed from the floors above, growing closer. Time to go, Marcus insisted. The other exit now. Rebecca hesitated, looking at the wealth of evidence surrounding them. We can't just leave it all. We have enough, Karim assured her, grabbing her arm gently. Your father started this journey. Let's make sure we're around to finish it. They slipped through a maintenance tunnel Rebecca had discovered during her months living in the building, emerging into an adjacent basement, just as voices reached the hidden room they'd left behind. Marcus's phone buzzed. Sarah says the council chamber is already filling up. Hammond's people are trying to move the vote forward. Tell Kate to release the story, Karim decided. With what we just found, they won't be able to stop it now. They emerged into the bright morning sunlight, quickly moving to their waiting cars. Eleanor and Kate were already there, Kate working furiously on her laptop. Story's live, Kate announced as they pulled away from the curb. My editor says it's already trending on social media. Local news stations are picking it up. Eleanor was examining the photos they'd taken, her eyes wide. This is everything Thomas was looking for. Proof of generations of corruption, all leading right to William Hammond's door. Rebecca's phone chimed with a news alert. Hammond's just arrived at City Hall. He's denying everything, claiming the documents are forgeries. Let him deny it, Karim said, a grim smile playing at his lips. The original records are still down there in his building, the building that legally belongs to Crescent Holdings. He turned to Sarah. Contact our lawyers. I want an immediate injunction to prevent any demolition or tampering with the site. As their convoy approached City Hall, they could see news vans already gathering, reporters setting up for live broadcasts. The story was spreading faster than Hammond could contain it. Look, Eleanor pointed to her tablet. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is announcing an investigation into Summit Development. They're asking anyone with information to come forward. Kate was still typing furiously. More sources are contacting me, former employees, other developers, who were forced out of business. Once the dam breaks. Karim watched the growing media circus with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. My grandfather used to say that justice moves slowly, but it moves surely. He never lived to see this day, but he never lost faith that it would come. Rebecca squeezed his hand. Dad believed the same thing. That's why he kept searching, kept gathering evidence, even when it cost him everything. As they pulled up to City Hall, they could see William Hammond on the steps, surrounded by reporters shouting questions. His usual composure was gone, replaced by barely contained fury as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. Ready? Karim asked, looking at each member of their unlikely team. Eleanor straightened her jacket. We've been ready for years. Rebecca took a deep breath, clutching her father's documentation. Time to bring it all into the light. Together they stepped out into the bright morning sun, ready to face whatever came next. The truth had been hidden in the Hammond building's shadows for generations, but now it would finally have its day in the sun. The city council chamber hummed with tension as Karim and his allies took their seats. News of Kate's explosive story had spread like wildfire through Boston's political circles, forcing an emergency public hearing instead of the quiet approval Summit Development had planned. William Hammond sat across the aisle, surrounded by lawyers frantically reviewing documents on their tablets. His usual aristocratic confidence had been replaced by barely contained anxiety as he watched more reporters file into the chamber, their cameras focused on his every move. The social media response is overwhelming, Sarah whispered, showing Karim her phone. People are sharing stories of how Summit Development forced them out of their homes, destroyed historic buildings, manipulated property values. Hammond's board of directors is calling an emergency meeting, Marcus added, checking his own messages. Major investors are already demanding answers. Rebecca sat between Karim and Eleanor, her father's research spread across her lap. She'd spent the morning organizing the evidence they'd gathered, preparing to present it to the council. "Look at this," she murmured, pointing to a document. "The pattern of shell companies they used. It matches exactly with what we found in the sub-basement." The council chairman called the meeting to order, his voice grave. "In light of recent allegations, we're suspending the normal agenda to address concerns about Summit Development's proposed historic district project." Hammond's lead attorney stood immediately. "Mr. Chairman, these allegations are baseless. The documents being circulated are obvious forgeries, part of a calculated attempt to damage Summit Development's reputation and manipulate property values." "Forgeries?" Karim stood, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Like the documents your client used to steal my family's company, or the false evidence used to destroy Thomas Blackwood's career?" The chamber erupted in murmurs as Kate Chen raised her hand. The chairman recognized her, and she stood professional and composed. "The Boston Globe has verified these documents through multiple independent sources. Furthermore, we have evidence that Summit Development has been using the same tactics recently, manipulating property values and forcing small businesses out of the historic district." Rebecca rose next, her voice steady despite her obvious emotion. "The Hammond building isn't just a historic structure. It's evidence of generations of corruption. My father gave everything to expose the truth, and now we can prove he was right." She began presenting their evidence, methodically laying out the connections between Summit Development's current practices and the historic patterns of corruption centered around the Hammond building. The council members leaned forward, their expressions growing increasingly serious as the scope of the scandal became clear. Hammond's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd," he burst out, rising from his seat. "My family built this city. We created thousands of jobs, developed countless properties. A few administrative irregularities don't change that legacy." "Administrative irregularities?" Eleanor's quiet voice cut through the chamber. "Is that what you call destroying people's lives, taking their homes, their businesses, their reputations?" A young councilwoman raised her hand. "Mr. Hammond, can you explain why Summit Development has been using a company called Crescent Holdings to purchase properties in the historic district? A company that, according to these records, legally belongs to the Al-Rashid family." Hammond's lawyers huddled together, whispering urgently. Before they could respond, the chamber doors burst open. A team of FBI agents entered, led by a stern-faced woman who immediately approached the chairman. "I'm Special Agent Victoria Martinez," she announced. "In light of evidence of extensive financial fraud and corruption, we're serving Summit Development with multiple subpoenas. Additionally, we're requesting an immediate freeze on all demolition permits pending our investigation." The chamber erupted in chaos. Reporters rushed to file updates, council members huddled in urgent discussion, and Hammond's lawyers surrounded him protectively as he tried to push through the crowd toward the exit. Karim felt a hand slip into his and turned to find Rebecca, watching the scene with tears in her eyes. "Dad would have loved this," she said softly, seeing the truth finally come out. "Your father was a hero," Karim replied. "He started this journey, laid the foundation for everything that's happening now." Eleanor joined them, her face glowing with vindication. "Thomas always said the Hammond building held the truth. He just needed the right people to help bring it into the light." Sarah approached with her tablet. "The story's gone national. Real estate watchdog groups across the country are calling for investigations into similar patterns of corruption in other cities." "And the Hammond building?" Rebecca asked anxiously. "The Historical Preservation Board is fast-tracking protected status," Sarah confirmed. "No one's going to be demolishing it now. It's evidence in a federal investigation." As the chamber gradually emptied, Karim stood at the windows, looking out over the city his grandfather had once hoped to help build. The shadows of corruption were finally being exposed, but he knew this was just the beginning. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked, joining him at the window. Karim smiled. "Now we do what my grandfather always dreamed of. We build something honest, something that helps people instead of exploiting them. Rebecca looked up from her phone. The tenant rights groups are already contacting me. They want to know if we'll help protect other historic buildings, other communities facing development pressure. We will, Karim assured her. But first, we have a building to restore. He turned to face them all. Eleanor, Rebecca, Sarah, Marcus, Kate, the unlikely team that had helped expose generations of corruption. The Hammond building has been a symbol of power and greed for too long. Let's make it stand for something better. As they left City Hall, the afternoon sun painted the city in shades of gold. Reporters called out questions, cameras flashed, but Karim barely noticed. His mind was already racing with plans, not just for the Hammond building, but for a new way of developing the city, one that honored both its history and its people. The day's events would reshape Boston's future, but for Karim, it felt more like restoring something that had been lost, his grandfather's dream of building with integrity, of creating spaces that brought people together instead of driving them apart. And in Rebecca's eyes, he saw the same vision, the same determination to honor her father's legacy by continuing his work. The weeks following the city council hearing transformed the Hammond building from a symbol of corruption into a beacon of hope. Karim had moved quickly to secure the site, working with historical preservation experts to begin the delicate process of restoration while maintaining the evidence federal investigators needed. Rebecca had taken charge of the architectural planning, her expertise in historical restoration finally being recognized by the same firms that had once shunned her father. She spent long hours in the building, mapping its secrets and planning how to preserve them while adapting the space for a new purpose. The hidden rooms are actually perfect, she explained one evening, spreading detailed plans across a table in what had once been the building's grand lobby. We can preserve them as a museum, documenting both the corruption they enabled and the investigation that exposed it. Karim nodded, studying the plans. The lobby's original grandeur was already beginning to re-emerge as layers of neglect were carefully stripped away. And the rest of the building? Mixed use, Rebecca replied, enthusiastically. Affordable housing in the upper floors, community spaces below, maybe some offices for non-profits working on housing justice and historic preservation. Eleanor, who had been organizing the vast collection of documents they'd discovered, looked up from her work. The tenant rights groups are especially interested in setting up a legal aid clinic here, helping other communities fight predatory development. The building had become a hub of activity. Preservation experts worked alongside federal investigators, documenting every detail of its hidden spaces. Journalists continued to visit, drawn by the ongoing revelations about how the Hammond family's corruption had shaped the city. Sarah entered, carrying fresh coffee for everyone. She'd thrown herself into the project with unexpected passion, her corporate expertise proving invaluable in untangling the complex web of properties and companies they'd uncovered. "The FBI just called," she announced. "They've traced Summit Development's illegal activities across 5 states. William Hammond's board forced him to resign this morning." "And Crescent Holdings?" Karim asked. "Fully restored to your family's control," Sarah confirmed with a smile. "Your grandfather's reputation has been completely cleared. The financial press is calling it one of the most significant exposures of corporate corruption in decades." Karim moved to the windows, watching the sunset paint the city skyline. Workers were carefully removing the tarnished brass letters that had spelled out Hammond Building for over a century. Soon new letters would go up, though they were still debating the name. "I think we should name it after your father," he said to Rebecca. "The Blackwood Building, a place dedicated to preserving history and fighting for justice." Rebecca's eyes welled with tears. "Dad would have said the building already has a name, a history. He'd want us to honor that but transform its meaning." "The Hammond Building," Eleanor mused. "But now it stands for exposure of corruption instead of its concealment. A reminder that the truth always finds its way to the light." Marcus entered, looking concerned. "We've got journalists outside again. Someone leaked that William Hammond's being indicted tomorrow. They want statements." Kate Chen, who had practically moved into the building while working on follow-up stories, looked up from her laptop. "The public has a right to know. This Stories bigger than just one building or one family now. It's about how power corrupts across generations and how it can be confronted. Karim considered for a moment. Tell them we'll hold a proper press conference tomorrow, right here in the lobby. It's time to share our plans for the building's future. As the others dispersed to prepare for the next day's announcements, Karim found Rebecca in one of the hidden rooms, running her hands along the aged wooden panels that had concealed so many secrets. "Having second thoughts?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "Just thinking about how much has changed. A month ago, Mom and I were hiding here, afraid of losing everything. Now you're helping design its future," Karim finished. "Your father would be proud. He used to say that buildings are like people. They can change, grow, find new purpose." She turned to face him. "What about you? This isn't exactly the investment opportunity you were looking for." Karim laughed. "No, it's something much better. My grandfather always taught me that true wealth isn't about money. It's about what you build, what you leave behind." He gestured to the building around them. "This place, what we're turning it into, that's a legacy worth building." Through the windows, they could see lights coming on across the city as dusk settled. The Hammond building cast a different shadow now, its darkness giving way to promise. In its walls, they had found not just evidence of past corruption, but the foundation for future justice. Tomorrow they would announce their plans to the world. The media would focus on the scandals, the indictments, the fall of powerful figures. But for those who had fought to expose the truth, the real story was about transformation, of a building, of a community, of themselves. The Hammond building would stand as a testament, not just to how power could corrupt, but to how courage, dedication, and unlikely alliances could transform even the darkest legacies into beacons of hope. 3 months after the explosive city council hearing, the Hammond building hummed with a different kind of energy. Construction crews worked alongside historians, carefully restoring the building's grandeur while preserving the evidence of its complex past. The hidden rooms, once used for corruption, were being transformed into educational spaces where visitors could learn about the city's history of development and community resistance. Karim stood in his temporary office, once William, Hammond's private sanctuary, reviewing the latest restoration plans with Rebecca. The room's dark wood paneling had been restored to its original luster, but the hidden wall safes now stood open, their contents carefully catalogued and preserved for the ongoing investigation. "The community response has been overwhelming," Rebecca said, spreading out architectural renderings across the antique desk. "We've received over 300 applications for the affordable housing units, and dozens of non-profits want to relocate here." Sarah entered with a stack of papers, her usual corporate attire replaced by more casual clothing that reflected her evolving role in the project. "The Historical Preservation Board just approved our final plans. They're calling it a model for how to adapt historic buildings for community use while preserving their cultural significance." Eleanor, who had been organizing a community meeting in the restored lobby, joined them with fresh coffee. "The tenant rights groups want to start their legal clinic earlier than planned. They're already getting calls from other neighborhoods facing development pressure." Karim studied the building's original blueprints, now marked with their planned modifications. "What about the foundation work? Have we found a way to preserve the evidence while making the building accessible?" "Actually, yes," Rebecca replied, enthusiastically. She pulled out a detailed structural diagram. "We can stabilize the hidden rooms while creating a public exhibition space around them. The FBI's evidence collection is almost complete, and they're supportive of our plans to turn this into an educational center." A knock at the door interrupted them. Marcus entered with Kate Chen, who had been working on a comprehensive book about the Hammond building scandal and its broader implications for urban development. "You'll want to see this," Kate said, opening her laptop. "William Hammond just pleaded guilty to federal charges. Part of the deal includes surrendering all his remaining properties for community development." The news rippled through the room. For generations, the Hammond family had shaped Boston's development through corruption and intimidation. Now, their empire would be transformed into resources for the communities they had once exploited. "There's more," Marcus added, "the FBI's Investigation has sparked similar probes in other cities. Development companies across the country are facing scrutiny over their business practices. Sarah's phone buzzed with an alert. The mayor's office just released a statement supporting our community development model. They want to use it as a template for other historic properties in the city. Eleanor smiled, tears in her eyes. Thomas would have loved this. He always said that exposing corruption wasn't enough. You had to build something better in its place. Rebecca squeezed her mother's hand. We are, Mom. Every day. The sound of construction from below reminded them of the ongoing transformation. The building's grand staircase was being restored, its marble steps cleaned of decades of neglect. The ornate railings, once symbols of exclusion and privilege, would now welcome community members to spaces designed for their needs. Karim moved to the windows, watching workers carefully restore the building's elaborate stonework. My grandfather used to tell me that real change happens slowly, like water shaping stone. But sometimes, if you're patient and persistent, you can watch it happen before your eyes. Speaking of change, Sarah interjected, the community board wants to discuss the building's name again. They've been researching its history before the Hammond family's ownership. What did they find? Rebecca asked. It was originally called the Liberty Building, Sarah replied. The land was part of a stop on the Underground Railroad. The first owner built it as a symbol of hope and resistance. The room fell silent as they absorbed this information. The building's true heritage had been buried beneath layers of corruption, just like its hidden rooms had been concealed behind false walls. Liberty Building, Karim tested the name, a return to its original purpose. Rebecca nodded slowly. A place of refuge and transformation. It fits. Eleanor wiped away tears. Thomas would have loved that too. He always said, buildings hold the truth of their time in their bones. Maybe this building's bones remembered what it was meant to be. A commotion from the street drew them to the windows. A group of community activists had gathered below, carrying signs supporting the building's transformation. Among them were faces they recognized, people who had lost homes to Summit Development schemes, small business owners who had fought against displacement, young activists working for housing justice. This is the real legacy we're building, Karim said softly. Not just preserving history, but helping it find its true purpose. Sarah checked her watch. The community meeting starts in an hour. The architects want to present the final plans for the affordable housing units. As they gathered their materials to head downstairs, Karim caught Rebecca studying the room thoughtfully. What is it? Just thinking about how spaces change us, she replied. This room used to be where Hammond plotted to destroy communities. Now it's where we're planning to rebuild them. The afternoon sun streamed through the restored windows, casting warm light across the antique floors. Outside, the sounds of construction mixed with the voices of community members arriving for the meeting. The Liberty Building was awakening to its true purpose, its transformation a testament to the power of truth and the possibility of change. The community meeting in the Liberty Building's restored lobby marked a turning point. The space that had once symbolized exclusion and privilege now buzzed with the energy of diverse voices, all contributing to the vision of its future. Residents from throughout Boston's neighborhoods filled the rows of chairs, while architectural renderings and historical photographs lined the walls. Rebecca stood at the podium, her confidence growing as she presented the final renovation plans. The months of work had transformed her from someone hiding in the building's shadows to a leader in its resurrection. Her father's architectural expertise lived on in her detailed understanding of how to preserve history while serving present needs. The affordable housing units will maintain the building's historic character while providing modern amenities, she explained, indicating the detailed floor plans. Each apartment will have unique architectural features restored to their original beauty. The communal spaces will honor both the building's past and its new purpose. From his seat in the front row, Karim watched Rebecca with growing admiration. Their partnership had evolved naturally over the months of working together, professional, respect deepening into something more personal. He saw in her the same passion for building something meaningful that had driven his grandfather's early career. Eleanor, seated beside him, noticed his expression and smiled knowingly. She had watched her daughter bloom during this project. finding not just purpose but joy in continuing Thomas's work. The pain of loss would always be there, but it had been transformed into something constructive, something healing. Sarah presented next, outlining the selection process for the building's non-profit tenants. We've prioritized organizations working on housing justice, historical preservation, and community development, she explained. The goal is to create a hub for positive change in the city. The audience's questions revealed their deep investment in the project. People shared stories of how development had affected their communities, their hope that the Liberty Building could become a model for a different approach. Kate Chen, sitting near the back with her notebook, captured these testimonies for her book. During the break, Karim found Rebecca in the building's newly restored garden courtyard. The space had been hidden for decades behind boarding and debris, but now flowering plants were beginning to reclaim the carefully reconstructed trellises. "Your presentation was perfect," he said, joining her on a bench. "You've made this project your own." Rebecca smiled, touching one of the climbing roses. "It feels like everything in my life was leading to this moment. All those years studying architectural history, Dad's research, even those months hiding here with Mum, it was all preparation." "I know what you mean," Karim replied. "When I first saw this building, something called to me. Now I understand. It wasn't just business instinct. It was a chance to right old wrongs, to build something meaningful." Their eyes met, and the connection between them deepened. They had started as unlikely allies in exposing corruption, but their shared vision for the future had grown into something more personal, more profound. Inside, the meeting resumed with community members sharing their hopes for the building's programs. A local historian spoke about documenting the building's connection to the Underground Railroad. A housing advocate described plans for teaching tenants' rights. Each speaker added another layer to the building's new identity. Eleanor, watching from the back, felt Thomas's presence strongly in these moments. She could picture his joy at seeing his research vindicated, his daughter thriving, his beloved building returning to its true purpose. The pain of loss had softened into proud remembrance. As the meeting concluded, Sarah approached Karim with news from their legal team. The final paperwork came through. Crescent Holdings is officially recognized as the rightful owner, and the building's historic status is permanently protected. Marcus, coordinating with the security team that would protect the building's sensitive archives, added his update. "The FBI's finished documenting the hidden rooms. We can begin the museum installation next week." The sunset painted the lobby's restored stained glass windows in brilliant colors as the crowd slowly dispersed. Community members lingered, forming connections, sharing stories, beginning to make the space their own. The building that had once served corruption was becoming a home for hope. Later, in the quiet of the early evening, Karim found Rebecca in one of the hidden rooms that would soon become part of the museum. She was studying the old photographs they'd discovered, tracing the connections between past and present. "Do you ever wonder," she asked without looking up, "what Dad would think of all this? The building becoming a symbol of justice instead of corruption." Karim sat beside her, carefully examining one of the photographs. "I think he'd say that buildings, like people, reveal their true character over time. This one just needed the right people to help it remember its purpose." Rebecca leaned against him, comfortable in the growing intimacy between them. "And what about us? Where do we go from here?" "Forward," Karim replied simply. "Together. Building something that matters." Through the window they could see lights coming on across the city as dusk settled. The Liberty Building cast a different kind of shadow now, not one of power and corruption, but of protection and possibility. In its transformed spaces, new stories were already beginning to unfold. Eleanor found them there a little later, lost in conversation about future projects, other buildings that needed salvation, more communities that needed support. She watched them quietly, seeing in their shared passion and growing love another kind of restoration, the healing of hearts that had been wounded by loss and injustice. The building creaked softly around them, its old bones settling into its new purpose. In its hidden rooms and secret passages, in its grand public spaces and quiet corners, The echoes of the past were being transformed into promises for the future. The truth had finally found its way into the light, and in that light something new and beautiful was growing. 1 year after the Hammond scandal broke, Boston's autumn painted the Liberty Building's restored facade in golden light. The transformation was complete, inside and out. The building that had once housed corruption now bustled with community activity, its spaces alive with purpose. Karim stood in what had once been William Hammond's private office, adjusting his tie as he prepared for the official opening ceremony. The room, now part of the building's historical museum, displayed evidence of its complex past alongside stories of community resistance and renewal. "The mayor just arrived," Sarah announced, entering with her tablet. She'd evolved from corporate manager to community liaison, her business expertise now serving a different purpose. "And you won't believe. Who else is here? Real estate developers from across the country, coming to learn about our community-centered approach." Rebecca appeared in the doorway, elegant in a professional suit that echoed her father's style. "The housing justice organizations are ready for their presentations, and Mom's finished setting up the memorial exhibit, the Thomas Blackwood." Memorial Library occupied what had once been the building's most elaborate hidden room. Eleanor had transformed the space into a research center dedicated to urban development history and community advocacy. Thomas's architectural drawings and research notes lined the walls, his life's work finally recognized and honored. "Kate's book is selling out everywhere," Marcus reported, joining them with security updates. "The expose of development corruption has sparked investigations in cities across the country. People are calling it a watershed moment in urban development." Karim moved to the windows, watching people gather in the courtyard below. The garden had bloomed magnificently in its first season, the flowering vines climbing restored trellises, just as hope had renewed the building itself. "My grandfather would have loved this," he said softly. "He always said that true success wasn't about making money, but about making a difference." Rebecca slipped her hand into his, their engagement ring catching the morning light. Their relationship had grown naturally from their shared vision, two people healing from family losses while building something new together. "Dad would have said the same thing," she replied. "He believed buildings should serve people, not power." Eleanor appeared with a small box she'd discovered during the final restoration work. "Look what we found behind the last hidden panel. Photographs from the building's original opening in 1878. The first owner really did establish it as a sanctuary, a place of hope." The images showed a diverse group of 19th-century Bostonians gathering in the same courtyard where people now assembled. The Liberty Building's first purpose, as a haven for those seeking freedom and opportunity, had come full circle. Sarah checked her watch. "It's time. The first tour group is ready." They made their way downstairs, passing walls now covered with community artwork and historical photographs. Each floor told part of the building's story, from its noble beginnings through its dark years and finally to its restoration. The lobby hummed with excitement as visitors gathered for the opening ceremony. Community members who had participated in the building's transformation stood alongside city officials, journalists and housing advocates from across the country. "Mr. Al-Rashid," a young reporter called out, "how does it feel to see your investment transformed into something so different from what you originally planned?" Karim smiled, remembering that first cold morning when he'd stood outside the building, sensing its potential but not yet understanding its true value. "This isn't just an investment in property," he replied. "It's an investment in people, in community, in justice. Some things are worth more than money." Rebecca, standing beside him, added, "The Liberty Building proves that redemption is possible, for buildings, for communities, for people. It's a reminder that the truth, once exposed, can transform darkness into light." Eleanor, who had once hidden in the building's shadows with her daughter, now stood proudly before the crowd. "My husband believed that architecture could either serve power or serve people. Today we honor his vision by choosing to serve people." The morning sun streamed through the restored stained glass windows, painting the gathered crowd in rainbow hues. Outside, the city bustled with its usual energy, but within these walls, something extraordinary had taken root. Sarah stepped forward to begin the ceremony, but paused as something caught her eye. "Look," she whispered, pointing to the ceiling. The lobby's elaborate chandelier, painstakingly restored to its original beauty, cast a pattern of light across the marble floor. The design, previously hidden under years of grime, formed a perfect compass rose, a symbol of guidance and hope. "Even the building is showing us the way forward," Rebecca said softly. Karim squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of the moment. The Liberty Building had called to him that first morning, its secrets waiting to be uncovered, its true purpose waiting to be restored. Now, surrounded by the people who had helped transform it, he understood that some investments yielded returns that couldn't be measured in dollars. The ceremony began, but the real celebration was in the energy flowing through the building, in the conversations between community members, in the plans being made for future projects, in the sense that this was not an ending, but a beginning. Through the windows, Boston's skyline sparkled in the autumn sun. The Liberty Building stood among its neighbors, not as a monument to power, but as a beacon of possibility. Its shadows had been banished, its secrets transformed from burdens into lessons, its spaces renewed with purpose and hope. Spring returned to Boston, bringing with it new life and fresh beginnings. The Liberty Building's garden courtyard bloomed, with renewed vigor, its flowers reaching toward the sun just as the building itself had emerged from darkness into light. Karim and Rebecca's wedding took place in this transformed space, surrounded by the very community they had helped build. The ceremony combined their cultural traditions, just as the building combined past and present, strength and beauty, purpose and hope. Eleanor, watching her daughter exchange vows with the man who had helped bring Thomas's work to fruition, felt a profound sense of completion. The building that had once been their refuge had become a symbol of renewal, not just for them, but for the entire city. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered to Rebecca during the celebration, "not just of the building, but of everything you've become." The wedding guests represented every aspect of the Liberty Building's new identity: community activists, housing advocates, historians, and local residents, all gathered to celebrate not just a union between two people, but the fusion of vision and purpose that had transformed their city. Sarah, who had become an integral part of their extended family, raised her glass in a toast to new beginnings built on the foundations of truth and justice. Kate Chen, whose book about the Hammond scandal had become a national bestseller, was already working on a follow-up about the community development movement that had grown from their work. "The Liberty Building is just the beginning," she told the gathered guests. "Its story has inspired similar transformations across the country." As evening fell, lights twinkled in the garden, reflecting off the building's restored windows. Karim and Rebecca slipped away from the celebration for a quiet moment in the Thomas Blackwood Memorial Library. "Sometimes," Rebecca said, running her fingers along her father's architectural drawings, "I feel like everything in our lives was leading us here. All the loss, all the struggle. It was preparing us for this moment." Karim nodded, understanding. "Completely. Your father and my grandfather, they never lost faith in the possibility of justice. They passed that faith on to us, along with the responsibility to build something worthy of their dreams." Through the library windows, they could see the garden party continuing below. Eleanor danced with Marcus, while Sarah shared stories with community members. The building hummed with life and purpose, its spaces filled with laughter and hope. "Look what came today," Rebecca said, pulling an envelope from her father's old desk. Inside was a letter from a National Preservation Society announcing that the Liberty Building's renovation model would be taught in architecture schools across the country. "Your father's legacy," Karim smiled, "and your mother's persistence, and your vision." "Our vision," Rebecca corrected him. "We built this together, all of us." They rejoined their guests in the garden, where the string lights created a canopy of stars below Boston's evening sky. The Liberty Building rose above them, its renewed facade a testament to the power of transformation. Eleanor approached with news from the community board. "The housing program is being replicated in 3 other cities. They want us to consult on the projects." "Us?" Rebecca asked, surprised. "All of us," Eleanor confirmed. "They want to understand how we balanced historical preservation with community needs, how we turned a symbol of corruption into a force for positive change. Karim watched the joy in his new wife's eyes, seeing in it the same passion that had drawn him to her and to this building. Then we'll show them. We'll help other communities reclaim their spaces, their history, their future. The celebration continued into the night, but it was more than just a wedding party. It was a celebration of possibility, of renewal, of the power of truth to transform even the darkest legacy into something beautiful. As the last guests departed, Karim and Rebecca stood in the building's entrance, looking up at its illuminated facade. The carved angels that had caught his attention that first morning now seemed to smile down at them, guardians of a space that had found its way back to its original purpose. "Ready for our next adventure?" Rebecca asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "With you?" "Always," Karim replied. "We have more buildings to save, more communities to serve, more stories to uncover." The Liberty Building stood silent around them, its shadows now friendly and familiar. In its hidden rooms and secret passages, in its grand public spaces and quiet corners, the echoes of the past had been transformed into promises for the future. Eleanor found them there, hand in hand, planning their next project. She smiled, remembering Thomas's words about buildings having souls, about architecture being a way to serve humanity. In the Liberty Building, his vision had finally been realized, not just through preservation of the past, but through creation of a living legacy that would continue to grow and serve. The Boston night spread out around them, a city changed by the truth they had uncovered and the hope they had built. The Liberty Building's lights shone like a beacon, guiding the way toward a future where development served community, where history informed progress, and where love could transform even the deepest shadows into light. And so their story continued, not ending but evolving, just as the building itself had evolved. For in the end, the greatest buildings, like the greatest loves, are not monuments to the past, but foundations for the future, their strength lying not in their walls, but in the lives they touch and the changes they inspire. In the garden below, the first flowers of spring reached toward the stars, their beauty a reminder that from the darkest earth, new life could always bloom. The Liberty Building stood guard over their growth, its own transformation a testament to the power of truth, love, and the endless possibility of renewal.